All right, guys, so now we have our two files. And what we're going to open up first is our snowman tutorial. So you just need to double click it to open it. And I'm going to slide it to the left of my desktop. And I'm going to close my H drive for now because we don't need it. And when you open up your viewer for this tutorial, when it's smushed to the left, you can always zoom in. There's usually a little sliding bar that will so you can read the words a little easier. So we're going to create a brand new file for this tutorial, and you'll see what it's asking you to do. It wants you to create a file that is 4 inches by 6 inches with a 300 resolution. So this is not new to you. You guys know how to create a brand new file, but we'll do it together just to start. So File, New, and let's name this file Snowman. Okay, I want everyone to call it Snowman. And I already did this before, so my settings are already at the 4 by 6 inches. So 4 inches for width. Make sure inches are selected specifically. 6 inches for height. 300 will be your resolution. Click OK. And you should have a little page that looks like this. That's 4 inches by 6 inches. It's what? All right, if it's, oh, okay. If your computer is glitching from opening up the tutorial, which happens to people, you can close it and just follow along with me. Okay, so just restart and just don't open the tutorial next time, okay? Don't worry too much about the tutorial for now, okay? If it's glitching, if it's not, then keep it open, but if it is, you can close it and just follow along with me, okay? All right, so we have 4 inches by 6 inches with a resolution of 300. And let's actually save this file because just when you rename the title, that doesn't actually save it. So let's save it. File, go to Save As, and you need to select your Studio and Media folder, period 5. So you want to make sure to go to your H drive first, and then click period 5. So in this case, that's what I'm going to. And you want it to be saved as a PSD, a Photoshop document. That's fine. That's what you want to select. And click Save. And now you have that document all set for yourself. Okay? All right. So moving along with the tutorial, the first thing that we're going to create for the snowman is a background. We need a place. We need an environment for this background, for the snowman to live. So we're going to create a gradient in our background using the gradient tool. So let's do that right now. And it's just going to be a nice blue background fading into white, which is very simple. So let's start. Let's first zoom into your page if you didn't do that already. So Control+ to zoom in and magnify. And then let's find the gradient tool. So I'm going to ask my live people, since you're the only ones that I can see in here right now, where does the gradient tool live? Okay, so it's in the tool panel on the left, but what does it look like? Let's be specific. It looks just like a gradient, right? It's a rectangle gradient, so don't confuse it with your rectangle tool like this. Don't confuse it with the shape tool. It looks similar, but it has a gradient. So click on your gradient tool. And as you know, whenever you click on a brand new tool, what happens at the top panel? What happens, Anthony? What do we see up here when you click on a brand new tool? Yes, you see a color slider, but in this case, you see the settings that belong to that tool, right? So yes, he's correct. You will see that color slider, that gradient, and that's what I want you guys to click on. Click on that gradient. Okay? Mine is set from the last period that I did this, but what you can do is just click on the very first gradient swatch. If it's the black and white one, or it doesn't matter, but as long as it's just one color plus white, that's really all that matters, just to start. Okay. And obviously, we don't really have to touch the white because that's a color that we want to use, but we have to change the color on the opposite side. So how do we change that color? Very good. Okay, so Yadiel just said it. So in order to change the color, there's a little swatch box right here. You're going to double click it. And when you double click that box, your color picker will appear. So here's the color picker, and we want to choose a nice kind of royal blue. So find a nice shade of blue that you like in the palette. And then I want you to click on it and select the shade that you want. Personally, for this tutorial, I recommend doing like a cooler, deeper kind of blue because it will have more contrast against the white. Okay? But it is personal preference, but this is my recommendation. And then once you select your blue, click OK. And on the opposite side of your gradient, even though the white's already selected, let's just double click. And in order to select white, you'll notice that that little dot is way up in the corner of your color picker on the upper left. And we know that it's pure white because you can see the number down here is FFFFFF. Okay, that's like the complete absence of color. That's the algorithm for it over here. So just make sure that that's where your little slider is and that it should read only with the letter F, and click OK. All right. Once you have this selected, we have our royal blue and then we have our solid white. All you have to do is click OK. Okay, now we're going to make our gradient. Before we do that, you have to make sure that the proper gradient setting is selected. So if you look at the panel up here with all of those gradient settings to the right, remember how there's different style gradients? There's a linear gradient. There's the radial gradient that's kind of circular and radiates out, right? So you want to make sure that your linear gradient is selected. That's the very first box to the right of that little sample color bar. Okay, make sure that your linear gradient is selected. That's important. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to make a simple vertical gradient by clicking and dragging the line down. But in order to make sure that our line is perfectly straight, what key on the keyboard should we hold down? What's going to stabilize it and make it straight? The Shift key. Hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and then find a spot on the top of your page, click down, and then you're going to drag about like 3/3 of the way. I mean 2/3 of the way rather. Okay, drag down and let go, and you should have something to this effect. If your color didn't drag down enough, you can always do Control-Z to undo it and then try again. Okay, because for example, if I just kind of drag the line and it's too short, you're going to have more white than blue. So you don't want that. You want there to be a little more blue than white. Okay, so we should have something like this. So now that we just created our gradient, what's an important step that we should do every single time that we do something new? What do we not want to forget about? Saving it. What's the keyboard shortcut, Liz? Very good. Control-S. And you'll notice I clicked on my move tool just to kind of stabilize everything, and then I did Control-S. And we're good to go. Okay, let's see what's next in this tutorial. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do, since we selected that blue color, is we want to reset our color picker. And I'll show you where that is. So we already know that our color picker lives on the bottom of our tool panel on the left-hand side, right? So I'm just going to change the color for a second so that to illustrate this. There we go. Okay, let's pretend our color picker was set on blue and we want to just reset it to the default, which is black and white. This square, by the way, is considered the foreground color. That's the main color that we always select from. This little white square is considered the background. More often than not, we don't use this background color, but just so that you're aware, the foreground color to reset everything, do you see that there's a tiny little icon to the left that literally looks just like your two color pickers? You see it looks like a mini version of it, like two small boxes, a black and a white box, right? I want you to click on that little icon and you'll see that it actually resets it back to just black and white, okay? So if yours was not reset, make sure that you click that little icon to reset it. Okay, we'll just go with it. And you can restart, but watch, and I'm recording, okay? Okay, so in the meantime, so now we have that reset, that's good. Okay, we have to build our snowman. So what we're going to do is we're going to find our ellipse tool. What does the ellipse allow us to create? What shape? Circles, exactly. And our snowman is made up of 3 circles. So we're going to go to our shape tool, which is usually the default is the rectangle, but we want to click on that and hold it down so that we can select our ellipse tool. And before we make our circle, I want everyone to create a new layer. Under the layers palette, you know where to click. It looks like a little folded Post-it note. Create a brand new layer. And then we're going to create a circle for the head. We want to make sure that that head is perfectly equal on all sides. So what key should we hold down when we make our circle? The Shift key. Very good. Hold down your Shift key. And then I want you to make your circle. That's going to represent the head. So we have something that looks like this. And we're going to rename this layer head. Okay. Once you rename that layer and you have your circle, we're going to press Control S. Remember, we want to save. Every single time we want to save every move so that we don't lose any of the information or any of the steps that we did. Okay, I'm going to I clicked on the move tool. I'm going to centralize that head a little more. Oops, okay. Okay, so just make sure your layer is selected. That's why mine wasn't moving. So click on the layer to select it. Okay, do you want to try logging in someplace else? You can. Do you want to try that computer? You just have to wipe it down. The one on like the very end and this on the last row. Like the very first one here. Okay. All right, so we have our head. Now we need a circle that's going to represent the body or the torso. That's like the chest to the belly area of our snowman. So let's click Create a New Layer. And we're going to click on our ellipse tool, press down the Shift key, and we're going to create another circle, but this time we want our circle to be a little bit bigger than the head, okay, so that we can differentiate the two. And once you're happy with the size, you let go, and let's rename this one Torso. That's a more technical term, but if you want to call it chest, you could call it that. You could call it whatever you want. Okay. And once you create that torso, I want you to save, Control S. All right, so now we're missing the bottom of our snowman, so we have to create yet another circle. Let's create a brand new layer. Let's click our ellipse tool on the Shift key. Hold down the Shift key, and this time we're going to make the base of our snowman even bigger. We want that circle to be even bigger. So let's name that base or bottom, whatever you want to call it. And click Save. The base. Okay. Now there's something else that I want us to pay attention to, and that has to do with the order of our layers. So we still want to be organized about this. So everyone follow along. Automatically, when you create a brand new layer, Photoshop will put that layer at the top, which logically makes sense, right? However, is the base of the snowman the top of the snowman? No. What is the top? The head. Very good. So how do we move our head layer to the top? You drag it. Very good. So we're going to click and drag. So let's highlight the head, and you'll notice that as I click and drag, in between the layers, you're going to see that there is two little lines that light up, and that shows you, like if I were to let go right now, that's where my head would go, that layer. But obviously I want that layer to go way to the top, so I'm going to click and drag until I see those lines light up and it drops exactly where I want it to. So now we have the head layer, but the base layer is in the wrong spot, and so is the torso. They have to be switched. So I'm going to click and drag my torso above my base, and I'm going to click save, Control S once I do that, once I'm done. And so theoretically, all my layers are proper in place. My head should be on top of the torso, which should be on top of the base. Because if they're overlapping, that's how you want them to overlap. Okay? All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our 3 circle shapes are the size that we want them to be. So when you made your shapes before, maybe you're like, you know what? I'd like to tweak them a little bit. Like, let's say like the torso, you're like, it's a little too similar in size to the head. You can click on those individual layers, press Control T to resize. And if you're going to resize your circle, you have to make sure to hold down the Shift key, because you don't want the circle to suddenly lose its evenness all around. So hold that Shift key. And if you have to resize, you do what you need to do. Maybe you have to make it bigger. Maybe you have to make it smaller. That's personal to you and your particular piece, but do what you need to do. Take a moment just to do that. And resize. Okay. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that the head, torso, and base of our snowman is equally aligned. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. There's a fun little way to do this in Photoshop. We need to first select all 3 layers at the same time. So how do we select them at the same time? What do we hold down? The Shift key. Very good. Because all 3 layers happen to be right next to each other, we can hold the Shift key, click either the top layer or the bottom. It doesn't matter what you start with. Click, hold down the Shift key, and select all 3 layers at the same time. Okay. Now that these are all selected, I want you to pay attention to something. At the top panel, I want you to make sure, have the Move tool selected. If you don't have the Move tool selected, click it now. Okay? And then look at the panel, look at the settings that go along with that Move tool, and you'll see that there's an area that says Show Transform Controls. Okay? To the right of that, you're going to see like a series of like little rectangles, it looks like. And as we scroll by, this one says Align Top Edges. This one says Align Vertical Centers, Align Bottom Edges. The one that we want to select kind of looks like the snowman. And it says Align Horizontal Centers. It's the one second from the right. So once again, here we go. It says Align Horizontal Centers. That's the one that we want to select. It's going to align everything. So click it, and suddenly our snowman is perfectly aligned. It might be possible that when you aligned it, maybe you placed your head or one of the parts a little too far from the others. So if you need to, you can always move that particular part of the body closer to the others, and then select all 3 again, and then click your Align Centers tool, and it should fix it for you. Okay, and now that all 3 layers are currently selected and I have my Move tool, I'm just going to shift and center my snowman a little bit on the page. I think that's better placement for him. Okay, once you do all of that, you know the drill. Press Control S save all of your work. How's everyone doing? Did you get that so far? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, Liz, I know you're going to catch up. Okay. So we have to change the color of our snowman. How are we going to do that? We want to turn him into a white snowman because obviously snow is white. How do we change the color? What's the obvious thing to do? Let's start with the head. How do we change the color of the head? What? You could do that. Can we do it from the layers palette? Just because it makes it more contrasted and easy to see. Okay, so let's start with the head. We're going to double click on, not the word, but we're going to double click the icon in the layer and look at what pops up. We have our color picker. So we want to click on white. So you click on this area here until you can drag it as far to that upper left corner as possible. The number should read FFFFF for white. I'm going to cancel that because there's another way we can do it that I just want to point out. If you double click the same way for your color picker, you will notice that follow my mouse, follow the cursor. Remember, when you slide off of here and the color picker's open, it turns into a little medicine dropper tool. And your background swatch, not the foreground, but the background is always set on pure white. So you can also just click over there. That's another way of doing it. Okay. And we're going to proceed to do the same thing with each layer. So we did it with the head, then double click the torso, choose your white, click OK. And then the same thing with the base. Choose the white and click OK. And then we're going to press Save, Control S. Okay. I'm just checking in on everyone. How's everyone doing at home? You guys following along okay? If you're doing well, give me a thumbs up. Okay, I see a few thumbs up. If you're having issues, type into the chat. Okay, I see Logan, you're having some issues. As I mentioned, I am recording this, so you could always check the recording a little later too, okay? All right, so back to the tutorial. All right, we need to give this snowman some dimension. So we're going to fast forward a bit. We did all of these steps so far that I'm scrolling through, like changing the colors of the circles. Okay, here we go. Next part of the tutorial is telling us to create an inner shadow. So the shadow effect is something that I really wanted to focus on with all of you because it's such a game changer and there's so many options and it'll create dimension. And you'll see why in just a moment. And it's just, I love the shadow tool. So this is the inner shadow. There's also a drop shadow, and I will explain the difference. And there's specific settings that we need to go to create this shadow. And we'll look at that in just a second. But first, let's actually find where the shadow lives in our workspace here. Okay, I want everyone, we're just going to start with the head. Okay, so click on the head layer. Make sure it's selected. And I want everyone to take a look in your layers palette at the bottom. We already know where the trash can is. We already know how to create a new layer. It's that little folded post-it. We have a folder option, which is something we'll go over at a later time that helps you organize layers. Then we have this. This is the fill or adjustment layer, and I'm just going to click on it so you guys can see. There's so many different options and tools that live here that you're going to love. And we'll get into that also at another time. This is the masking tool also for another time, but the one that we want to pay attention to today is called effects, okay? It's an abbreviation for the word effects, like EFFECTS. Okay, I'm sure you've heard that before. It's an abbreviation because there's several effects that live in this tool right here. So I want everyone to click on the FX tool. This is where your shadows live. So there's a drop shadow. You see the option right here. We're not going to click on that yet. But then there's also something called an inner shadow. So I want you to click on the inner shadow. And you'll have a pop-up box appear with all different settings. Okay. Now, before we really do anything major, let me just click out of this for a second and by the way, you guys should do this too. Zoom in as close as you can to that head because I really want you to see how these effects work. Okay, so we'll click on the effects after you zoom in if you didn't do that already. Okay, zoom into the head, click on the FX, click on inner shadow, and then we have our pop-up. So let's just kind of analyze what pops up here in the settings. So for starters, you will notice that there's another color swatch bar. Okay, we're familiar with how these swatch bars work by now. So if you double click it, guess what? It opens up the color picker. So not all shadows are black, okay? You're gonna find that you can have shadows of literally every single color of the rainbow. So let's just pretend you wanted to change your shadow color. You could do that, okay? Let's just pick any random color just to see. Oops, there we go. Okay, you could have a purple shadow, for example. And you might see just based on my settings right now, like you'll see like a little tiny edge right there. And let's just play with the settings a little bit. So you'll notice that there's also something called opacity. So that has to do with how transparent the shadow is. The default is 75. Like if this was 100% opacity, you wouldn't really be able to see through it so easily. And then you'll also notice that there's the size. There's distance, choke, and size. So when we look at the size, you can either type in a number here or use the slider. Use that slider. Do you see what's happening? Like the larger the number, what happens to that shadow? What's happening to it? Does it get bigger or smaller? It gets bigger. Very good. Okay. So originally this tutorial said that it wanted you to do 15 pixels. This is what 15 looks like. Personally, I don't think it's dramatic enough and I like to push my creativity. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys. You can make it however big or small you want it to be, but personally, I like this. I think it's nicer at a larger, what do you call it? Like a larger area of shading. I think there's more dimension. The other thing that you can play around with is the distance. So distance, this is kind of interesting. This extent, it actually makes your shadow travel further from one side. And it's all based on the angle that's set. Do you guys see that there's an angle? It's usually set to 120. Okay, do you guys see that? But if you were to change the angle, you can either type in how many degrees you want, or you can click on this little circle and totally change the angle to the opposite side of your shadow. For example, it could go underneath. It could go over here, over there. It's totally up to you. It was originally set to 120. I'm just going to keep it there for now. And what I'm also thinking is I might change my shadow color to a deeper blue because the environment is blue, and I think it kind of makes sense that blue would get reflected onto that snowman. So I'm going to select a particular shade of blue. Now, since I have this shade selected, we all know by now that there's a specific number for a shade, right? And that lives down here. I'm actually going to select this and copy it because when I do my following layers, I want my blue shade to be identical in each layer. So I'm going to select this and Control-C, click OK. But I also want to know that my settings are the same throughout. So sometimes it's helpful to write this down if you have very specific settings. The distance, I'm going to just round up and make it 60 so I can remember that it's 60. The size is 90. And then there's another setting that the tutorial wanted us to do. So that's the noise setting. So I just want you to see what noise does. Right now, our shadow is nice and smooth, But look what happens. If we did noise and they said, I think it was like 15%, what happened to our shadow? Do you see the difference? It made it grainy. Okay, so noise, it's personal preference. Like obviously, look, you can make it really extreme. I'm going to leave it at 15 for now. Maybe even less, I think. 12. Yeah, maybe 12. Okay. In this case, it kind of works for the texture of the snow, but it's a case-by-case basis with the art piece that you're doing. More often than not, I almost never have the noise selected. So here's my settings, and you guys remember your settings. So I had my blue color selected. I copied and pasted the number. My distance was 60. I'm at 90 for size, and then 12% for noise. I click OK. And then I want to do the same thing for my torso. So click on my torso layer, click on FX, inner shadow. And now when I click on my color picker, I'm just going to paste the number that I had. Right there, it goes to the exact same shade of blue. My distance was 60. My size was, I think, 90. Yep, and my noise was 12. And if you forget these settings, you can always click back in your previous layer. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. And I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. I'm going to zoom out so that you can see what I have so far, and we'll continue with this tomorrow.